On Easter Sunday, I rose before dawn and I planted colorful plastic-filled Easter eggs and hard-boiled Easter eggs in the yard. I put stuffed animals, some candy, and a few goodies at the door leading out to the back. And when our 3-year-old daughter woke up and went near the door, she was so excited. Her eyes widened, her eyebrows raised so high they almost touched her hairline. She took in a huge breath. Both hands immediately went to cover her mouth, which had opened so far that her chin almost hit her chest, and she said in a squealy little 3-year-old voice, "Oh my goodness, the Easter Bunny came for me." It was a beautiful moment that I feel horribly guilty about. I do not want to lie to her. As we gathered eggs that morning, I could see Beckett's mind working. Mama T, she said, "These eggs are the eggs we dyed yesterday." "They are," I said. After we spent about 20 minutes gathering them all up and filling her basket, she said, "Mama T, the soft duck that the Easter Bunny brought me is like the duck that I saw at the store that was on the shelf on the way out the door the other day." "It is?" I said. I'm so torn about this culturally acceptable duping. I really watch what I say to her. I will not lie to her outright about this. If she asks me directly, I will tell her. But right now, she doesn't even know to ask. I don't even bring up the bunny conversation. Her school friends and the television have already done that for me. But there's also peer pressure at age 3. How would she feel if the Easter Bunny came to the house of all of her school friends and not hers? But I don't feel good about not telling her. I want her to trust us, and I want to trust her. And concealment with the intent to mislead is no more moral or proper than outright lying. Now, with children as well as adults, trust must be earned. As for our daughter, it's important that we create a relationship based in mutual trust, because the stakes will get higher and higher as she gets older and older. But for now, it's our job to serve as her Jiminy Cricket until she can clearly hear her own small voice separate from all the messages that she's been given. And in the meantime, we must act as her conscience until she develops an accurate assessment of the world we live in, even though we are actively influencing her experience of that very world. Now, it seems to me that the Easter Bunny myth, like so many others in a child's life, is passing on a cultural value that we should dupe our children when they are at their most gullible. It's like taking advantage of their naivete, lying to them. The lesson seems to be that it's okay to lie to them to propagate this larger myth that in the spring, the bunny brings Easter eggs and chocolates to the home of little children. But in the long run, when the jig is up, often the child can feel like they've been betrayed by adults whom they trusted. And yet, at other times, the child comes away feeling grateful to have had that imaginary land with bunnies delivering eggs as fertile ground in which to bloom. Now, what makes the difference is whether we use that cultural myth to later talk about when and whether the adults in her life have lied, or if we continue to lie to them when they ask us point blank. So these stories can be used as an opportunity to build trust. Now, I've heard this dilemma about whether or not to lie to our children about Santa and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny, these holiday characters, for several years being a minister here, parents asking me, what should they do when attempts to not engage at all are difficult? Because the myth will make it into your home either because it is talked about there or even because it's not talked about there. I've wanted so desperately to find a way to be able to tell her the truth or to not have to even participate in this little game. But telling the whole truth all the time isn't necessarily good either. That can be spiteful. It can even be cruel, especially to a child who doesn't yet have the cognitive development to hold such an ambiguity. See, children have a hard time spotting a lie or even tracking the narrative of a lie or intentions or motivations. You can make sense out of all kinds of things while I'm talking if you want. Poetic justice of thunder on command here. When I asked our daughter if the prince in Frozen was telling the truth when he claims that the princess was dead when just seconds earlier she was actually shown alive, Beckett said, "Oh, yeah, he's telling the truth." Now, he did look sad and remorseful, but he certainly was not telling the truth. And I don't think it's her memory or her capacity to tell a story that's preventing her from recognizing it. She simply can't yet imagine a world where she would be lied to. Parents are all knowing in her world and infallible, at least for a little while. So her first attempt at grasping lying was very linear and literal. "You lied," she said to me. "You told me you were picking me up, and Papa did." Now, it doesn't matter if I was mistaken. In her mind, I very clearly lied to her. Now, I also know adults, by the way, who still have this linear understanding of truth and lies in their relationships as well, and it doesn't make very much room for fallibility or grace. But by the ages of about 6 to 8, most children understand that mistakes can happen with good intentions present and that bad motivations and manipulations are also present in the world. But as we come of age, like our 9th graders will be doing next week, we come to learn that there are chapters in our lives that do not have happy endings. We are given more responsibility and accountability for our lives in a new way. We have more and increasingly more privacy and more opportunities to fail with much higher stakes. We learn that people manipulate and lie and steal and torture and kill and are even negligent, and that we hold all that power as well. But in this church, we try to teach our children a moral context that moves beyond punishment and reward, beyond what's in it for them, to being in relationship with others who may have very different wants and needs than they do. But the question still remains, how do we teach our children that they will be lied to by adults and the media, their friends, even strangers, and at the same time teach them that trust and love and truth are worth the risk? How do we encourage telling the truth and help them to discover that vulnerability is indeed a strength? How do we teach that telling the truth in a way that is compassionate, truth in love, when all around them people lie and we have lied to them? Now, in a study conducted by the University of Massachusetts researcher Robert Feldman, he demonstrates how reflexive the act of lying is for many people. In the study, Feldman and his team of researchers actually asked 2 strangers to talk for 10 minutes. The conversations were recorded, and then each subject was asked to review the tape. Before looking at the footage, the subjects told the researchers that they had been completely and totally honest and accurate in their statements. But once the tape was rolled, the subjects were amazed to discover that all the little lies that came out in just 10 minutes. According to Feldman, 60% of the subject lied at least once during the short conversation. And in that span of time, subjects told an average of 2.92 false things. Now, I'm not sure what 0.08 of a lie is. But basically, that's 3 lies every 10 minutes. So out of 16 waking hours a day, that makes a lot of opportunities to lie. Teaching our children about the lying in the world begins with understanding our own motivations, with understanding why, in fact, we lie. According to psychologist and credibility expert Paul Eckman, there are many reasons why we lie. I have adapted his list a bit. The first of all, he says, most often we lie out of convenience. It seems easier in the moment to lie than to tell the truth about something like not wanting to go to a party, or to the salesman at the front door, I just bought a new vacuum cleaner, thanks. We demonstrate these little white lies to our children all the time. Be polite, we say. Tell them you like the gift or the food, we say. Don't let the hosts know you're bored and ready to leave, we say. Lies seem to be a little bit of social lubrication. But developmentally, interestingly enough, lying is a cognitive signal that you understand or can anticipate what others are thinking. And it actually parallels the development of empathy. Now, maybe I'm just getting less polite as I get older, but honestly, I don't want you to tell me that you like my meatloaf if you don't. Because I might make it for you every single time you come over to my house. I pay attention like that. I may, in fact, give you more of what you don't want. But there are social rules that we need to teach our children that involve impulse control. In order to be effective in relationships and in the world, we have to learn how and when to speak our truth. But when children are young, they don't understand the larger benefits of politeness or the social responsibility of attending someone's party or gathering in the longer arc of a friendship. They don't have the tools to find the truth that they can say, or the skill of how to say something tough in a way that can actually be heard. Now, if we never learned how to withhold all that we were thinking and feeling at any given time, it would drastically limit our choices and our relationships. So as we get older, too, our emotional landscape broadens, and we begin to recognize that the feeling we might be feeling in the moment is both fleeting and complex. The way that I feel in a particular instant may not, in fact, encompass how I feel about an entire event. And so my truth actually depends a lot on my own self-awareness and what my values and my goals are. But all of this leads to that ever uncomfortable question that we have to struggle with at some time or another. Would you rather be right or effective? Unfortunately, in teaching impulse control, we also teach holding our own feelings inside to the point of not knowing which feelings are in fact our own, layered in shoulds and oughts. One true voice can be difficult to hear. So we have to encourage knowing who we are and how to use who we are in order to effectively live out our values and work towards our goals. Punctuation mark. Another common motivation for lying, Dr. Eckman suggests, is that we lie to protect ourselves or to protect others. Now, this can be quite practical, protecting ourselves from punishment or from physical threat. But it can also be lying to protect ourselves from a perceived threat, protecting our ego or our image. If you want someone to tell you the truth, you actually have to create safe space so that they don't feel threatened. You have to seek the motivation behind the behavior. Suspend your judgment for a moment and seek to understand the values behind a particular choice. I often say, assume sane and well-intended until proven otherwise. But the idea is to encourage that truth-telling. Investigators do this all the time. Join with the person by identifying what key value drove them to their action so that they admit they did it instead of lying about it. We so desperately want to be seen and understood, motivations and all. But our need to protect ourselves and others comes from fear. Fear that we will lose something, an opportunity, a friendship, a relationship, our own privacy or status. The fear of losing privacy is especially important when we're raising teenagers. See, we are responsible for our children, and at the same time, we have to give them increasing privacy and a longer and longer leash in order for them to actually build our trust. And they, of course, have to earn it. Trust and verify until enough evidence is built to make a case to merely trust. Now, psychologist Paul Eckman, in a great little book called Why Kids Lie, writes that especially with teenagers, we should have a list of what are called non-negotiables, things that we have to know in order to keep them safe, and especially if they don't understand why. Now, he suggests having this conversation really early, far in advance before a crisis even occurs, letting them know that because their peers have so much influence on them, in order to keep them safe, they need to tell you about certain things. But that there are other things you will make space for them to say, that's private, or I'd rather not say. So things that Eckman suggests should be on your must-know list: behavior of and information about friends, whereabouts during their free time, movies and TV watched, homework and behavior at school, rides in cars with others and driving behavior, drug and alcohol use, and sexual behavior. Now, the last reason we frequently lie is to make ourselves appear more valuable or to increase our status, which can actually be the symptom of a much deeper need unmet. Now, this is all the boasting and bragging and embellishing and fibbing that happens in our lives, in job interviews, in pulpits, in relationships. We are storytelling creatures. Made in the image of God, we too have the power to create. What we do with that power matters. And I want our daughter to have an active and creative imagination, but overuse or inappropriate use of this skill can be a cry for help. For instance, when a child says that he hit a home run at the baseball game and you know that that wasn't true, this might in fact be about insecurity, a need to be accepted by the group who's listening. What he might want or need might actually be more batting practice and not know how to ask for it. But instead of correcting him on the spot, an obvious path to humiliation, consider a private conversation that talks about the motivation behind the lie, and then encourage him to go back to those he lied to and talk about his insecurity or his inadequacy and come clean. And as for adults, for us, pay attention to where you stray from the truth once every 10 minutes or so, even just in hyperbole. And it might direct you to some internal work that can help you better understand your own motivations. But we don't only lie about ourselves, we lie about others. Speaking untruths about others is another cry for social status. It functions at the level of seemingly creating an enemy in order to gain acceptance. There's this parable by an Italian priest from the 1500s named Felipe Neri that says, a woman went to the priest and she said confession that she'd spoken badly about people around town. She was asking for penance and wanted forgiveness, and the priest told her, go and get a chicken and pluck the feathers and walk about the town and throw them as your penance. She did this, and he said, then she returned to the priest, and he told her, now go around and retrieve all those feathers. She said, I can't possibly do that. They're thrown about the whole town. And the priest said, yes, like your words. Remember, what you throw out, you cannot actually all take back. Eckman's final reason why we lie is in order to demonstrate our power over an authority and to get what we want. Eckman claims that a successful lie establishes a child's power, both to the child and to the parent, who may actually suspect the child has lied but can't prove it. In younger children, this comes out in teasing or tricking, and then becomes about testing parents' omniscience. For a teenager who's trying to differentiate from his or her parents, each successful lie is like a step toward autonomy. But when they know that we care more about the relationship and their safety than the lie of the moment, that we care more about the impact of a breach of trust than the crime at hand, we earn their respect and they ours. Now, science has also proven that it's hard to lie to someone whose values you share, and it's even harder to lie to someone whom you respect. So we've looked at why we lie, because it's easy in order to protect ourselves or others, to increase our worth or status, and to demonstrate our power. But how good are we at telling when people are lying? Given the earlier statistic of lying almost 3 times every 10 minutes, you probably have had a lot more opportunities to practice today than you might have thought you did before coming in here. And the sermon's about 20 minutes, so that would be right. Research shows we actually are pretty terrible at lie detection. Most people can figure out we're being lied to only about 54% of the time. No better than flipping a coin, even with people you know well. Now, there's a proven method of improving your rate of detecting lies to nearly 94%, which would come in handy for a lot of reasons, but especially if you're the parent of a soon-to-be preteen or teenager, or if you're an HR professional, or a lawyer, or a poker player, or a minister, or you just want to know. But Dr. Eckman was highly motivated himself to figure out a scientific way to prove that people were lying. And when we examine his culture around lying, there are 2 stories that motivated his search. One story from childhood. When he was a teen, he was actually 2-timed by a girl who he caught red-handed with the other boy at the movies. Later, that girl lied and told her mother that young Eckman had called her a terrible name that I will not repeat from the pulpit. And he wanted to know why. He was punished, actually, by his parents based on her lie. A second peek into Eckman's culture of lying came from his work as a therapist. Early in his career, he met with someone who was suicidal, who was up for release from an institution, and he asked her point blank whether or not she was safe to release, whether or not she would leave and make another attempt. She said she was safe, and he let her go, only to discover later that she had killed herself. Now, Eckman had the interview on tape, and he watched it over and over and over again, trying to see what he could have possibly missed. And then he spent his entire career focused on mapping the face, identifying the muscles, both voluntary and involuntary, that move with certain emotions. He discovered cross-cultural microexpressions, these involuntary flashes of emotion that go across the face in 1/25th of a second in high-stakes situations, when something is to be lost or gained. Now, I've actually taken this training, so be careful coming through the line today. Just seeing the incongruence, though, is one thing. What you do with what you see is another skill entirely. But the question that I still have is, why are we so naturally bad at it? If evolutionarily lying is so important to our very survival, wouldn't knowing when we are being lied to also be important? I believe the answer may in fact be developmental. Our capacity to be moral and our capacity to understand complex motivations is in fact developmental. And that means that different stages require different information, much like our capacity to develop a cultural competency skill to be able to include increasingly more complex differences. Or even the development of a moral compass to include more and more people under your umbrella of concern. Your capacity to speak the truth in a way that is palatable is a developmental skill. To gauge how much needs to be shared in any given moment develops over time and through experience. But it also comes from examining our own culture around lying. our own culture around trust. What we've been taught about lying matters. When we have been lied to and by whom matters. So we need to understand our own motivations, our own lenses, our own culture around lying and trust. When we examine those stories that we carry around with us about when and whether we've been lied to and how it affects our present moment, we can increase our capacity to make space for an ever-expanding truth that carries within it complex emotions and values that are subject to context and circumstance. At our core beliefs about the world also impact our decisions around trust and truth and deception. If you believe the world is merely survival of the fittest, then lies are merely another means to an end. And lying and being lied to is just another part of life. But if you don't, then you need to find other people like you. You're going to need some help. A place to come where you can foster a sense of trust in this world, where we can seek the truth in love together. And so we gather in this place to remind ourselves that there is a larger arc of the human story, a religious arc that binds us together, of which we are all a part, that values love over fear, that lifts up compassion. We gather in this place to remember the beauty in the world and to remind ourselves to stay awake to the pain and the suffering and to do something about it when we can, but not to be consumed by the fire. We gather as heretics to choose for ourselves whether the values of our culture need be our own. We gather to witness freedoms unfolding in the midst of a diverse family that holds us accountable. And all this takes me back to the Easter Bunny. What speaks louder to our children than what we tell them to do is what we actually do ourselves. If you take the story of the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy literally and in that short, brief span of Easter Sunday, then the fact is we are lying to our children. And yet, there is a bigger, longer arc of the story that is about our relationship to our children and what we're teaching them about the world. A message of a spirit of unseen gift-giving and abundance. A message that sometimes we tell partial truths in defense of a greater goal. And one day, they will be called to do the work of bringing their children into this larger human story that is full of truth and lies, beauty and suffering, a story filled with drama and metaphor, and they will have to decide for themselves whether or not they want to play these games of our culture, who that they will bind themselves to, and what the consequences of making those choices will be. I choose to bind myself to this religious community. And I choose to play the game, not because of the game itself, but because of the opportunity for a connection with the players and the fodder for conversation about what matters in this life to me and to them. So I invite you to spend time this week watching your own lies and how they may, in fact, reveal a greater truth. Amen.